Do you know who wrote the Fifth Amendment?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution.
Why you would hire a guy like Dervish Schertler, and the comment is, if you're in deep shit, that's who you call. Do you feel like you're in deep shit?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Here I am sitting in front of you 6 years later saying, who the fuck do you think you were for doing that? It is a total disgrace what you did to this country. I hope you're paying him well. And I hope that one way or the other, somewhere, sometime, you answer for your crimes.
This wasn't just another heated Senate exchange. Just before this hearing, thousands of pages from Dr. Anthony Fauci's pandemic-era diaries were released publicly, reigniting debate over some of the government's biggest COVID decisions. Now, Senator Bernie Moreno confronts Fauci over those years, and Fauci refuses to answer.
Mr. Fauci, do you know who David Schertler is?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Fifth Amendment of the Constitution. What does the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution say?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution.
No, I'm just asking you what it says.
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
I'm going to give the Constitution to my aide. He'll bring it over to you so you can have it for future reference. I think it's something that every American should know what the Constitution says. Do you know who wrote the Fifth Amendment?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution.
So you're invoking a right that you don't know who wrote it or what it says. Is that correct?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Wow. Well, let me tell you who David Schertler is for the audience, because he was ejected by the chairman. He's a high-profile criminal attorney. He's represented some really great people, like Senator Bob Menendez. Maybe that's somebody who my Democrat colleagues may remember took gold bars as bribes from the Egyptians. And there's an article here in the Washington Free Beacon that talks about why you would hire a guy like Dervish Schertler, and the comment is, if you're in deep shit, that's who you call. Do you feel like you're in deep shit?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Clearly, what you think today is that somehow you're above reproach. Somehow you feel like you don't need to be treated like a normal American. Can you do me a favor in the audience and stand up if during the time of the COVID pandemic you were called a racist for calling the virus a Wuhan virus or the China virus? If you thought the 6-foot rule was total crap, if you thought the vaccine wasn't something that you should take, if you thought it was outrageous the way the mask policy was rolled out, if you were fired from your job for not taking that vaccine, including members of the military, if you thought closing schools was catastrophically stupid, and that you thought that during these times saying these things made you somehow a lesser human being. Dr. Fauci, can you just turn around and look at the people behind you? You're not willing to do that? That's not a question. It's not a question. To your lawyers, not a question. It's a request. All you have to do is look up from your lawyers and look at the people who were absolutely shamed for saying what we know now to be the truth. You can't even look at them? That's a question. Are you able to look at them? You can sit down in the audience.
This hearing comes as the long-term effects of COVID policies are still being debated across the country. Researchers continue studying the educational impact of prolonged school closures, with several studies estimating significant learning losses that could affect students for years. Those broader questions are part of why these hearings remain politically important today.
There was a mom in Ohio during the depth of the coronavirus pandemic, decided to go to her high school football game for her son. They hadn't been out much. The kids had been learning at school, and then the school got shut down. They hadn't really gotten much out of that education. As any parent knew, that remote learning was no learning at all. But it was a Friday night. Her son wanted to go watch a buddy go play football. So they went to the stadium. They sat alone, far from everybody else, just a mom, a dad, a few kids. They didn't feel they needed to wear masks because it was stupid, because they were outside. They all live together. They're not near anybody. Dr. Fauci, do you know what happened to that mom and that family? That's a question.
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
They were dragged out of that stadium and arrested. Those policies were put in place because you had moronic politicians that listened to the words of a megalomaniac who was more interested in having met a Kardashian than the suffering of the American people, and that is you. Your advice to communities like that, to idiotic politicians who enforce those rules, arrested that mom for watching a football game with her own family outside. When that story broke, I said to myself, I cannot stand idly on the side and watch this happen. It was about 6 years ago today that I decided I'm going to give up my businesses, sell them all, run for office, run for the United States Senate. Here I am sitting in front of you 6 years later saying, who the fuck do you think you were for doing that? It is a total disgrace what you did to this country. And if my Democrat colleagues are standing there defending you, I hope the voters of the United States of America watch the clips of every one of you doting on a guy who was more interested in being a celebrity than saving American people. I will make it my mission to make certain that every single one of those Democrats who did that will see that clip over and over and over again. Because there is no defense of what you did. You may have had a 50-plus year legacy of public service, but it ends in total and complete disgrace. So let me ask you an opportunity to answer one question. Will you apologize, just apologize, to the people who you harmed through your actions? Will you say, do you have the dignity to just say you're sorry?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Republican lawmakers say Americans deserve answers about pandemic decisions, while many scientists argue these investigations risk discouraging future public health leaders from serving in government. That larger debate now hangs over every question being asked in this hearing.
So you won't apologize to the military members who Joe Biden summarily dismissed from the military for not taking the vaccine?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Will you apologize to the business owners that lost their business, shattered their lives, and they'll never recover?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Will you apologize to the moms who had to force their infant children, 2, 3, 4-year-olds, to put masks on and what that did and how that traumatized those kids?
Under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Will you apologize to the family members of the people who died because they took your advice and not only got the first vaccine, but the 5, 6 other boosters that they did not need?
To answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Will you apologize to that mom from Ohio for being arrested for watching a football game with her family?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
So you didn't know who wrote the Fifth Amendment. It's James Madison. Lived in this town. I can only wonder what he would think of somebody like you invoking his writings to shield culpability for the actions that you took. It's no secret why you have to hire the biggest dirtbag attorney on the planet, because of what you did. I hope you're paying him well. And I hope that one way or the other, somewhere, sometime, you answer for your crimes.
The political and legal debate surrounding Dr. Anthony Fauci had already intensified before Senator Bernie Moreno began questioning him. Just days before this hearing, Senate Republicans publicly released more than 1,000 pages of Fauci's COVID-era diaries, arguing that the records deserved renewed public scrutiny. According to Republican members of the committee, the documents raised additional questions about internal discussions during the pandemic. Dr. Fauci has disputed those claims, maintaining that the diaries are consistent with his public statements and scientific advice throughout the pandemic. The hearing itself became one of the most closely watched congressional confrontations since the pandemic because it reflected a much broader national debate. Years after COVID-19 disrupted daily life, Americans remain divided over lockdowns, school closures, vaccine mandates, masking guidance, and the government's overall response. Those disagreements continue to shape political campaigns, congressional oversight, and public trust in federal health agencies. Against that backdrop, Senator Bernie Moreno took a very different approach from several earlier lawmakers. Instead of beginning with scientific research or funding decisions, he immediately challenged Dr. Fauci over his repeated use of the Fifth Amendment. Moreno asked simple constitutional questions, including what the Fifth Amendment says and who wrote it. Rather than answering, Fauci repeatedly invoked his constitutional right against self-incrimination on the advice of counsel. Moreno then tried to make a broader point. He argued that someone relying on constitutional protections should at least be familiar with the amendment itself. Whether viewers agree with that criticism or not, it became one of the defining moments of this exchange because it set the tone for everything that followed. Every significant question received the same response, and frustration inside the hearing room became increasingly visible. The hearing then shifted away from legal arguments and toward the lasting impact of pandemic policies on ordinary Americans. Moreno asked members of the audience to stand if they believed they had been criticized, censored, or treated unfairly for questioning COVID-era policies. He mentioned people who opposed vaccine mandates, questioned school closures, criticized mask policies, or used terms such as China virus during the early stages of the pandemic. His argument was that many Americans felt they had been dismissed or labeled unfairly simply for expressing opinions that later became part of broader public debate. One of the most emotional moments came when Moreno described an Ohio family that was arrested after attending a high school football game during the pandemic. He presented that story as an example of what he viewed as excessive enforcement of public health restrictions. Moreno then revealed that incidents like those influenced his own decision to run for the United States Senate, arguing that government leaders had exercised powers that many Americans believed went too far. Those comments reflected a broader national conversation that continues today. Researchers continue studying the long-term effects of prolonged school closures, with many analyses concluding that students experienced measurable learning losses, while experts continue debating the balance between protecting public health and minimizing educational disruption. As the hearing entered its final stage, Moreno changed direction once again. Instead of asking technical or legal questions, he repeatedly asked Dr. Fauci whether he would apologize to different groups of Americans. Those included military personnel who lost their careers over vaccine mandates, business owners whose companies closed during the pandemic, parents concerned about masking policies for young children, and families who believed government guidance had caused lasting harm. Once again, Fauci declined every question based on the advice of counsel. His attorneys have consistently argued that invoking the Fifth Amendment should not be interpreted as an admission of wrongdoing. They maintain that remaining silent is a constitutional protection designed to prevent potential legal exposure, particularly during highly adversarial investigations. During and after the hearing, Fauci also argued that many of the accusations directed toward him reflected political disagreements rather than established legal findings. Republican senators, however, viewed the hearing very differently. They argued that years after the pandemic, Congress still has a responsibility to investigate how major public health decisions were made, whether scientific advice was communicated accurately, and whether federal officials exercised sufficient transparency during one of the most significant crises in modern American history. They contended that public confidence can only be restored if difficult questions continue to be asked, even years after the emergency has ended. Democratic lawmakers offered a sharply different perspective throughout the hearing. They warned that repeatedly targeting Fauci risks turning scientific disagreements into political battles and argued that public health officials should not become scapegoats for every controversial decision made during an unprecedented global pandemic. More than 150 scientists also signed a public letter defending Fauci and criticizing what they described as politically motivated attacks on his work. It is also important to separate verified facts from political allegations. During this hearing, Senator Moreno made serious accusations regarding Dr. Fauci's leadership and the consequences of pandemic policies. Those accusations represent the senator's political position and were presented during congressional oversight proceedings. Dr. Fauci declined to respond to those allegations during the hearing, and many of the broader disputes over pandemic decision-making remain matters of political and public debate rather than final judicial findings. Looking back, this hearing was about much more than one witness or one senator. It reflected a country that is still debating how COVID-19 should be remembered. Some Americans believe emergency measures save lives during an unprecedented health crisis. Others believe many of those same policies caused unnecessary economic hardship, educational setbacks, and lasting damage to public trust. Regardless of where people stand politically, one thing is clear. The pandemic continues to influence American politics, congressional investigations, and public confidence in government institutions. Hearings like this demonstrate that the questions surrounding COVID-19 have not disappeared. They have simply entered a new phase focused on accountability, transparency, and learning lessons for future public health emergencies. What do you think? Should Congress continue investigating the decisions made during the COVID-19 pandemic, or has the country reached a point where the focus should shift toward preparing for future public health crises rather than revisiting the past? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below.